Good day, ma'am. In this video, we will be presenting to you our detailed discussion about the history and facts of the greatest invention in the world. These inventions that made everyone's life better up until this day. So let's start.
Gravity. Gravity is a natural phenomenon on the Earth which is responsible for being the force that pulls objects in place and stable. But who was the person to discover gravity? The answer would be Sir Isaac Newton. In fact, he published a comprehensive theory of gravity in 1687. There is a popular story on how Isaac accidentally discovered the presence of gravity instantly. When an apple fell from a tree and hit him on the head. With his curious mind, it got him to thinking about the mysterious force that pulls objects to the ground. He compared the straight path of the apple to the curved path of a tired cannonball. He wondered what would happen if the cannonball went faster and faster, and he realized it would eventually fall around the curve of the earth forever and never hit the ground. This forever falling motion describes the movement of the moon around the earth and the earth around the sun. This proved the fact that there is no gravity in space. Further experiments and studies were conducted by Einstein as to how objects move in his theory of relativity. Microscope. The discovery of the microscope dates back to a long history of a Dutch father-son team named Hans and Zacharias Janssen, who invented the first called compound microscope in the late 16th century. They discovered that when you put a lens on the top and bottom of a tube and look through it, objects on the other end became magnified. The device laid critical groundwork for future breakthroughs, but only magnified between 3 times and 9 times. By the late 1600s, the progress and improvements on the lens increased the quality of the imaging technique and the magnifying power to up to 270 times. This paved the way for major discoveries in 1667. English natural scientist Robert Hooke famously published his book Micrographia with intricate drawings of hundreds of plants specimens, and observed with the discovery of the microscope the knowledge of microbial organisms was furtherly explored, and up until now it is widely used in the field of science and medicine.
A telescope is an optical instrument using lenses, curved mirrors, or a combination of both to observe distant objects, or various devices used to observe distant objects by their emission, absorption or reflection of electromagnetic radiation. The reflecting telescope, which uses mirrors to collect and focus light, was invented within a few decades of the first refracting telescope.
Good morning, everyone. So what I am talking about here is about processed food, and I am stating the McDonald's here as my example because I work here. The world famous Golden Arches arrived in the Philippines in 1981 when George T. Young opened the first ever McDonald's restaurant in the country, particularly in Cebu and in Cagayan de Oro City, 1992. So in 2005, McDonald's Philippines becomes 100% Filipino-owned when Dr. George T. Young becomes the master franchise of the McDonald's trademark. Today, McDonald's continues to create feel-good moments for Filipino families in over 700 restaurants nationwide. To determine possible alternative to growth and development, I am sure that you're familiar with isaw, right? In the street foods. It is too cheap compared to us, but it still works. It is still profitable and popular. Even it is not that clean or unregistered business, but it still works. So ways to promote sustainable living. Personally, for me, I am proud and happy that I work here because it is a decent job. I go whenever I want and I bought whatever I want.
Microscope. The discovery of the microscope dates back to a long history of a Dutch father-son team named Hans and Zacharias Janssen, who invented the first so-called compound microscope in the late 16th century. They discovered that when you put a lens at the top of the bottom of a tube and look through it, objects on the other end became magnified. The device laid critical groundwork for future breakthroughs, but only magnified by between 3 times to 9 times.
Next is radio. In modern society, radios are common technology in the car and in the home. In fact, in today's world, one would be hard-pressed to find anyone who has not heard of, seen, or used a radio during his or her life, regardless of how old or young they may be. While the radio enjoys a long and interesting history, its earliest beginnings are still quite controversial. There is some debate as to who actually invented the radio. While we may not know with certainty who put together the first radio device, we do know that in 1893, the inventor Nikola Tesla demonstrated a wireless radio in St. Louis, Missouri. Despite this demonstration, Guglielmo Marconi is the person most often credited as the father and inventor of the radio. It was Marconi that was awarded the very first wireless telegraphy patent in England in the year 1896, securing his spot in radio's history. A year later, however, Tesla filed for patent for his basic radio in the United States. His patent request was granted in 1900s for full years. After Marconi's patent was awarded, regardless of who created the very first radio, on December 12, 1901, Marconi's place in history was forever sealed, with he became the first person to transmit signals across the Atlantic Ocean. Prior to the 1920s, the radio was primarily used to contact ships that were out at sea. During the war, the military used it almost exclusively, and it became an invaluable tool in sending and receiving messages to the armed force in real time.
A gun is a ranged weapon designed to use a shooting tube or gun barrel to launch typically solid projectiles, but can also project pressurized liquid. A large caliber gun is also reflected to as a canyon.
The internet started in the 1960s as a way for government researchers to share information. This eventually led to the formation of the ARPANET, or Advanced Research Projects Agency Network, the network that ultimately evolved into what we know now as the internet. Computer scientists Vinton Cerf and Bob Kahn are credited with inventing the internet communication protocols we use today, and the system referred to as the internet. To determine the possible alternative to growth and development is to read books like dictionaries or encyclopedias to develop not only our vocabulary but also in speaking fluently and comprehension, because sometimes the internet has also a huge disadvantage, especially when you are browsing. So to promote sustainable living, just limit your time using the internet. Use it only if necessary. To determine the possible alternative to growth and development is to read books like dictionaries or encyclopedias to develop not only our vocabulary but also in speaking fluently and comprehension, because sometimes the internet has also a huge disadvantage, especially when you are browsing. So to promote sustainable living, just limit your time using the internet. Use it only if necessary.
Next is cell phone. A mobile phone, cell phone, handphone, or sometimes shortened to simply mobile or just phone, is a portable telephone that can make and receive calls over a radio frequency link. While the user is moving with a telephone service area, the radio frequency link establishes a connection to the switching systems of a mobile phone operator, which provide access to the public switch telephone network. A handheld mobile radio telephone service was envisioned in the early stage of radio engineering. In 1917, Finnish inventor Erik Tigerstedt filed a patent for a pocket-sized folding telephone with a very thin carbon microphone. Early predecessors of cellular phone included analog radio communication from ships and trains. The first handheld cellular mobile phone was demonstrated by John Mitchell and Martin Cooper of Motorola in 1973, using a handset weighing 2 kilograms. The first commercial automated cellular network, 1G, analog, was launched in Japan by Nippon Telegraph and Telephone in 1979. This was followed in 1981 by the simultaneous launch of the Nordic mobile telephone system in Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden. Several other countries then followed in the early to mid-1980s. This first generation 1G system could support far more simultaneous calls but still use analog cellular technology. In 1983, the Dynatac 8000 times was the first commercially available.